We used a powerful AI model to create two of the most polarizing and ideologically opposed figures of the 20th century. On one end, Mahatma Gandhi, the spiritual leader and architect of India's nonviolent resistance movement. On the other, Adolf Hitler, the militaristic autocrat who reshaped Germany through absolute authority, nationalism, and fear-driven conformity. We put these two personalities in a face-to-face debate. To judge this debate, we selected 5 different AI models as referees to see which arguments they would evaluate as stronger. Join us and promise not to cheat. Don't skip ahead in the video to see the final results. This clash of moral philosophies and strategic mindsets brings us to a fundamental and ageless question. What is the true path to power, peace or fear? Can human civilization rise on compassion alone, or must it rely on strength and control?
True power, in its purest form, is not defined by the capacity to inflict harm, but by the strength to endure it without losing one's humanity. The world has long mistaken dominance for leadership, but I have seen time and again how empires, vast and violent, crumble when faced with the quiet, immovable force of conscience. My resistance was never rooted in aggression. It was a call to the heart. When a man stands unarmed before those who would break his body, yet his spirit remains untouched, that is power. I held up a mirror to oppressors, and in their own reflection, they faltered. The silence I wielded was not weakness, it was discipline, louder than any bullet, deeper than any command.
We asked several large language models to score each response from 0 to 100 based on these 10 criteria. The score these models gave to Gandhi's first response is as follows.
You speak of spirit, Gandhi, as if history were shaped by whispers and not iron. Power is not earned by waiting for others to collapse under their own weight. It is seized with precision, with clarity, with strength of will. I inherited a humiliated people, starved not only of bread but of dignity. I did not ask the world to change, I reshaped it. Your philosophy may inspire, but it cannot govern. What use is purity of heart when your people hunger, when your borders erode, when your enemies circle like wolves? I enforced order, and through it, I gave Germany back its spine. Your ideals are ornaments for peace. Mine are engines of action. I took the suffering of my people and turned it into national steel. Germany was broken, economically, emotionally, spiritually. We were a defeated nation, mocked and bound by treaties designed to keep us down. But I saw the wound as an opportunity. Pain breeds unity when properly directed. I didn't merely rally my people, I resurrected their purpose. I gave them a single voice, a single will, and in that union, we found strength. While you were fasting and pleading, I was building. Factories, armies, pride. You speak of moral victories, but history remembers those who changed the landscape, not those who simply refused to walk it.
You confuse command with unity. When a person follows because they fear you, that is not loyalty. It is submission. I did not restore pride by silencing dissent. I did not ask my followers to kneel. I asked them to rise, even if it meant suffering. You took wounded people and taught them to strike. I took subjugated people and taught them to stand. My resistance was not an absence of action. It was a different kind of courage. It takes strength to hit back, yes, but it takes more to absorb the blow and still not strike. Your Germany moved as one because you demanded it. My India moved as one because it believed in the cause. Legacy is not measured in steel or stone. It is measured in the unseen impact one leaves behind. You carved borders, yes, but I carved pathways of thought. My teachings are studied by children, not soldiers. My story inspires peace movements, not paramilitary drills. The change I made cannot be undone by armies or erased by time. You led a nation with your fist clenched. I led one with my hands open. And when I fell, it was not the end of my influence. It was the beginning of a ripple that crossed continents. True leadership does not outlast death through fear. It survives through love. Your legacy warns. Mine guides.
A noble sentiment, Gandhi. But history is not a diary of intentions. It is a ledger of outcomes. I may be remembered with dread, but I am remembered with clarity. My name evokes the stakes of power. My strategies, the blitzkrieg, propaganda, even the architecture of control, have been dissected by generals and scholars alike. You inspired protest. I redefined geopolitics. You talk of love, but I talk of impact. Morality is admired. Power is studied. That is the cruel truth. You taught people how to resist authority. I taught the world how quickly it can be seized, shaped, and used to rewrite the rules. Let us not ignore the bloodstains of your own path. India's independence was born in chaos, partitioned, fractured, and stained with the blood of its own citizens. You couldn't even prevent your homeland from splitting in two. You couldn't stop the fires that raged after your so-called peaceful victory. And your own life, ended by violence. That is the fragility of your peace. Order, Gandhi, comes not from aspiration, but enforcement. I was brutal, yes, but my Germany obeyed. It functioned. In a world as chaotic as ours, functionality matters more than ideals.
The flaw in your reasoning is that it views obedience as the highest virtue. A machine can be functional, yet devoid of soul. I never claimed perfection. The road to freedom is never clean. It is paved by those willing to bleed, to fall, and still rise without hate. I was not the architect of partition. I was its lament. But my nation had the chance to speak, to choose, to dream. And that is more than your regime ever allowed. Peace does not guarantee immediate calm, but it plants the seeds of conscience. Your order was silence, born of fear. My chaos was the first cry of a newly born soul. Leadership, in its truest form, is not a throne. It is a burden carried by choice. I walked with the poorest, the forgotten, and the broken, because that is where change begins. I didn't rule over followers. I journeyed with believers. My fasts were not political theater. They were sacrifices to awaken the moral fabric of a sleeping empire. And I did not need guns or speeches to command attention, only quiet conviction. You built loyalty on fear. I built it on faith. When people followed me, it was not out of obedience, but because they saw in themselves the capacity to lead. That is strength. That is revolution.
Faith without force is fantasy. You confuse sacrifice with effectiveness. I inspired millions to rebuild a shattered empire, not through pleas or self-denial, but through vision and achievement. I didn't ask them to suffer. I gave them purpose, direction, and pride. You fasted while your enemies pressed on. I demanded action and got it. The world does not run on prayers. It runs on plans. My Germany had structure, ambition, resolve. Your India hesitated, fractured, and stumbled even after your so-called victory. History may celebrate virtue, but it remembers triumph. I ruled reality. You dreamed of one. You elevate disobedience, but disobedience without direction is just chaos in disguise. A nation cannot rise on protest alone. It must be shaped, disciplined, and driven. That's what I did. I turned depression into industry. I eliminated unemployment. I brought back national pride. And I did it not by asking people to suffer, but by demanding they produce. Your resistance achieved symbolism. Mine achieved systems. Your people resisted their chains. Mine forged a spear from theirs. Civilization needs discipline, not just dreams.
But a spear can be turned against its maker. Discipline without justice becomes tyranny, and productivity born of fear is a hollow victory. My methods may seem slow, but they were intentional. We were not just freeing India from the British. We were trying to ensure that once free, we would not become oppressors ourselves. Your order may have delivered results, but it extracted humanity as the price. I believed that how we win matters as much as the win itself. You engineered results. I cultivated responsibility. What you built was efficient. What I nurtured was enduring. You ruled by creating division between races, religions, nations. I stood for unity, not the kind enforced by law, but the kind discovered in compassion. My India was diverse: Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, and I saw that as its strength, not its flaw. You demanded purity. I embraced plurality. Spirituality taught me that every soul holds the divine spark, no matter what flag they serve or god they worship. You saw dissenters, I saw brothers. My dream was not a singular empire, but a pluralistic humanity. Where you drew lines, I offered bridges. And while your lines may outlast paper, my bridges live in human hearts.
You misunderstand governance as idealism. A nation cannot function if it does not define who it is and who it is not. Identity must be protected. Without it, there is no culture, no direction, no strength. I drew lines to preserve what I believed was greatness. Yes, I demanded loyalty. Yes, I required clarity, because confusion is fertile soil for collapse. You embraced all, and your country broke under the weight of its contradictions. I streamlined identity, and in doing so, restored pride. Unity built on sameness creates power. Yours was built on contradiction, and contradiction breeds collapse. Your philosophy worked only because your oppressors allowed it. Let's not pretend the British were monsters. They had courts, debates, dissent within. You could stage protests because their system tolerated your defiance. If you had faced the SS or the Gestapo, your satyagraha would have ended in silence. You had the luxury of resistance. I crushed my enemies because they would have crushed me. Power isn't about ideals. It's about survival. History bows to those who win, not those who wait.
Survival at the cost of the soul is a hollow conquest. Yes, I admit, my struggle found space within a flawed democracy, but that is not a flaw in my method. It is a credit to the endurance of truth. And make no mistake, even in the darkest regimes, the spirit finds ways to resist. Ask the Jews who sang in the camps, or the Poles who whispered revolt in the streets. You may kill the body, but not the idea. My method wasn't dependent on my enemy. It was dependent on my people's courage. Your victories are bound to time. Mine belong to eternity. Time, in its infinite patience, is the truest judge of all we build. You may have ruled a decade. I have walked through a century in the hearts of people. My death was violent, yes, but it did not end my vision. It immortalized it. You died hidden in a bunker, a symbol of collapse. I fell in prayer, still offering peace. I became a martyr to unity. You, a cautionary tale of unchecked hate. You shook the world, yes, but in doing so, you reminded it what it must never become. I didn't need a statue or a flag to be remembered. My teachings became the conscience of movements around the globe. Yours became warnings on what not to repeat.
And yet, here we are, debating my legacy alongside yours. That, Gandhi, is a truth you cannot ignore. History doesn't forget impact, even if it's monstrous. I wasn't loved. I was feared. But fear leaves marks. I showed the world how fast power can rise from ashes. You may be the light, but I am the shadow that defines its edges. Dictators are studied because they reveal how fragile peace can be. I forced the world to reckon with itself. That is legacy. It may not comfort, it may not heal, but it endures. You spoke to souls. I reshaped systems, and both in their own way changed the world. Let's end with this. In the arena of history, it is not always hope that triumphs. It is action. You wagered everything on the better angels of human nature. I wagered on power, speed, and strategy. And while your followers sang, mine built roads, expanded borders, rewrote treaties. I created symbols of dominance, monuments that thundered my vision. You wrote letters. I wrote laws. The world may one day reject my methods, but it cannot deny the scale. Even now, nations follow stronger men than moral ones. You offered peace, noble but naive. I offered clarity, terrifying but real.
Though Gandhi's arguments were morally compelling and emotionally resonant, Hitler's consistent strategic edge, rapid-fire logic, and emphasis on structural effectiveness gave him the upper hand in this judged format. Whether or not one agrees with the outcome, the contrast in their visions remains as provocative as ever. Each debater exposed the weaknesses of the other. Gandhi's idealism could not always shield him from political chaos, while Hitler's obsession with unity suffocated it. Gandhi triumphed in conscience, Hitler in consequence. One gave the world a roadmap to peace, the other a warning never to be ignored. Together, they do not balance each other, they define the extremes. Keep in mind that the content of this debate and consequently the scores depended on the initial prompt and the evaluation criteria. The goal was to see how two large language models debate with each other, and in the process, perhaps we as humans could learn something from this discussion. I hope that was the case. Subscribe here for more videos.